What up, what up, what up? Welcome to the Build a Mind podcast. Scott, you finally decided to show your face on the podcast. How are you today, man?
Yeah, I'm doing great. Yeah, man. I used to do my own podcast back in the day, 5 years ago, 3 years ago, something like that. And I was very happy to hand it off to you, younger blood, a little bit more excited, relatable to people. But yeah, I'm glad to be here today on this special episode today.
I mean, let's just be honest. You know that I've got a pretty face. Like I can talk to people. It's just much easier.
Exactly. There you go. Yeah, I'm not much of a people person, so I'm glad to have you on the team.
I think you're plenty people person. You just don't like doing it. So let's be honest.
There you go. There you go.
Well, I will say it's an honor to have you here on the podcast. For anybody that doesn't know, this is the late, great, amazing Scott Offord. He's the one that is the mastermind behind everything at Bitcoin Mining World, the podcast, the Mastermind Club, the Build a Mind boot camps, all of it. His favorite saying is he likes to throw spaghetti at the wall and see what sticks. So this podcast is one of those things that stuck.
Exactly. Yeah. And I'm really excited to have another special guest on this episode today. And I'm sure you're going to introduce them, do a good job at that. But yeah, so this guest, we've known each other for a few years. We've chatted back and forth a little bit and bounced ideas off each other. Yeah, so CK, a lot of people know him in the industry for firmware and his pool. But yeah, go ahead, Trevor. Why don't you do your thing and start us off?
For sure. Yeah. So CK, obviously, like you said, he's known around the space for firmware, for the pools. He runs solo CKPool.org, not-for-profit solo mining service. And we're kind of going to dive into what that means. What's the difference between solo mining and pool mining and whether it's the same thing, because I think it's a little bit different. But yeah, it's the first time that he's ever really been on a podcast. He kind of stays to himself. But we'll get to hear his takes on mining pools, decentralization, mining in general. Super stoked to get to be part of this conversation. Real quick, before we do that, Scott, how are you feeling about this price action that we've been seeing recently?
Oh, man, it's insane. Yeah, today, I mean, we're still above 80,000, and that's great. I've just kind of had to ignore it. It's just like one of those things we know it's going to go up, right? We've been prophesying it and just like, yeah, it's going to go up, right? So we just gotta keep on working and keep on doing it. So
this is the thing that I keep telling people, because I've only been in Bitcoin for about 3 years now, but now finally people are coming that I've been telling about Bitcoin for years. People are like, oh, like Bitcoin's so high, like maybe I should get in. And I'm just thinking, like, the fundamentals haven't changed at all. The only thing that's changed is the amount of people buying Bitcoin. It's still the exact same thing that it was 3 years ago. So now why all of a sudden are you excited about it? I've been excited about it for the last 3 years. What the hell?
The number go up. Well, we're in it for the number go up technology. They're in it for maybe the number go up, right?
Hey man, I'm in it for freedom go up. I'm in it for freedom go up. So, well, hey, before we do this podcast with CK, before we bring him up, I've got some things I want to tell the audience about. So, first things first, we have a new revolution, innovation in Bitcoin mining containerized solutions. So this is the Pod X from Greenwich Generation. It is a really cool and innovative solution. So I'm just going to show you guys this real quick.
Cool.
Understand a lot of the problems that a common miner out there or a common company that runs air-cooled units might experience. And we've helped a lot of other sites that use these air-cooled solutions, and we understand what you go through. Like, we understand the higher research issues that might come with some of these solutions. Like, it's really what drove us to want to try and solve that into one solution, which is what we ended up doing.
Nice. Yeah, so that just launched recently, and yeah, I'm happy to actually have a part in that. We went over to the Greenwich Generation plant and interviewed some of their people, and we're just trying to help them get the word out about this mobile mining container, huh?
Well, yeah, and I don't know if the audience caught it or not, but in that video, if you saw, the fans were coming out the top. So the air comes in through the sides, the air comes out through the top, and it's much more efficient cooling capacity when it comes to these containerized solutions. Instead of just pushing the air one way through it, it's actually bringing it in from both sides and out the top. And what that also does is something that they mentioned in a longer video that we're not going to share on this, but that airflow design actually sends the sound up and out, which makes it a lot easier for regulations and jurisdictions to not come after you for sound issues. Because, you know, we all know
Right.
Bitcoin mining is noisy as hell.
And actually, just today on Twitter, I saw them tweet out, and you saw that too, I know. They just won a good little court case there. I think the court actually sided on the side of Greenwich regarding the case that who was it, the DEC or somebody had against them. So that's looking good. I don't know, maybe their number will go up too. You know, the publicly traded company and all.
100%. I mean, they is a big court case. There was a lot riding on it, and they won. So that's bullish for everything that's happening right now. There's a lot of positive sentiment in the market, and with, you know, these court cases being won for the Bitcoiners is just a beautiful thing to see. So last thing I want to tell you guys about, I want to show you guys about the mastermind. It's something that Scott has put a lot of love into. You know, one thing we talk about on this podcast a lot is community. And in order to build a better business, build a better product, a lot of times you need to have community around you to help you kind of brainstorm, you know, have different ideas from different parts of the world, different, you know, types of people. And that's what we've done here. So check this out.
Join the Mastermind Club, a weekly gathering of Bitcoin miners sharing insights to help you optimize or build your mining business. Our community fosters open discussion and collaboration, connecting you with experts who can help you overcome challenges and find solutions faster. Every other week, we host the Mastermind Deep Dive, where industry leaders delve into the financial, operational, and optimization hurdles faced by miners like you. Brought to you by Bitcoin Mining World.
Yeah, so that's our mastermind club. And, you know, Scott, what is your biggest takeaway from putting this thing together? This has been a labor of love. We've got quite a few participants in it now, and it's actually free to the community. So, like, give us your thoughts on this, man.
Yeah, no, actually, we were charging a fee originally, right? And it was great, but I think what we found was we really just wanted to get this information out to as many people as possible. You know, and so yeah, it's a free club. Like I like to say, it's kind of like partly an accountability program and partly just a community where you can come along with other people who are just like you, who are interested in building their first industrial or commercial scale mining farm, right? And yeah, so the people that have come on, I mean, we've had success stories. You know, they've maybe even come out to our Build a Mine boot camp as well, and have started building their mines. So it's just been incredible seeing the growth. Yeah.
Absolutely. I have to say, from my own personal experience, you know, what I knew when I first started mining versus what I know now, thanks to the Build a Mine bootcamp, thanks to the Mastermind Club, has just absolutely just rocked my world. The amount of information that I know. I actually have people coming to me now. I've done this for like 7 months, 8 months. I now have people coming to me and asking me about Bitcoin mining. And of course, I'm the host of the Build a Mine podcast, so I should know a little bit about mining. But the Mastermind Club has been like vital to that knowledge base that I've been growing. So
nice.
Mad appreciation to you, Scott. Thank you for all that you do. But let's dive into the actual meat and potatoes of this episode. We're gonna bring CK up.
All right.
CK, welcome to the podcast, brother. How are you doing?
Thank you very much. Yeah, I'm great. Thanks
Awesome.
for the invitation.
From what I understand, Con, you don't really make a whole lot of public appearances like this, do you?
I don't. I think I've tended to stay low, maybe intentionally or maybe just because I sort of fell off the radar for most people because, you know, the low level nuts and bolts of mining has sort of been lost by the community. You know, from the old Bitcoin talk days where everyone knew me, and sort of people know me now for a pool when in actual fact that's like a minor thing that I do on the side. But again, I guess I've been out of the Bitcoin space out of people's sort of psyche, because I haven't actually been doing much apart from posting on Twitter, come X now these days. But yeah, this is actually the first podcast I'm on. I haven't consciously avoided it. I just really haven't sorted it out. But you've been pinging me now for, I don't know, a couple of years probably. You've been asking me to do this, and I said, yeah, why not?
Yep. I remember, back in the day, actually, a fun story. You know James Hilliard, right?
Oh, I do. I know him well. Yes, we worked together on quite a few things in the past.
Yeah. So I was working with How Long Mining at the time. I mean, it ended up really just being kind of a white label of Silicon. They were trying to take over the world and put Bitmain out of business. But anyway, one day he came up to me and said, "Hey, it's crazy. Bitmain is basically stealing this code, this firmware. They're not attributing things back to open source, and they're not like whatever. They're not really abiding by the rules of what open source firmware is all about, right?" And so he actually he went to Amazon.com and put in a copyright claim, and for a period of time, no one on Amazon was allowed to sell any Bitmain products, and that was pretty insane. I loved it because at the time, I was like, yeah, screw Bitmain. They're the monopoly, they're the devil, and but it made a lot of other Bitcoin mining equipment brokers upset for a period of time. Yeah, so that's my fun story about that. But the reason I bring that up is because you were obviously involved in the whole CGminer thing, right? And that's like the base software that really was what people used on their mining control boards.
Yeah. I mean, CGminer has a long history, and I think most people are unwittingly using it without even knowing anything about it. But
right.
Even I wasn't aware of its original origins, because what I did was I started out, first got into Bitcoin and mining in 2011. Which unfortunately I missed the Satoshi era entirely. So I started 1 month after he disappeared off the face of the planet. But what I did was I started hacking on what Jeff Garzik had written, which was CPU miner. Because I just said, wouldn't it be great if I could actually contribute to this code? And then I sort of adopted it and added GPU mining to it. And that's where the name CGminer came from. It used to stand for CPU GPU miner, but it stuck, so I didn't bother changing it after we went through the FPGA and then ASIC era. But the thing that I didn't know until Jeff told me himself was that he was actually asked by Satoshi himself to actually create a standalone miner for people to use. So basically, CGminer's origins go back to Satoshi's actually request to make mining software. And then Jeff wrote the CPU miner, and then I forked it and created the sort of one comprehensive miner for everything. And it became kind of the de facto standard from then on for GPU. And then by the time ASICs came around, I was the only person they approached about it. And it just sort of took a life of its own. And for a while there, I was writing drivers for these companies, and then they sort of started doing things in-house. And you know how China tends to work as well. They tend to go, well, this is great, we'll adopt this for ourselves and we'll take it. And Bitmain didn't involve us very much at all. They sent me one board of an S1. That was the last time that I actually ever had anything from Bitmain.
Really? Which was the X1? What was that all about?
The S1.
Oh, S1. Yeah,
that's S1. Like we're up to the S21 and so on. That was the S1, the original ant miner that they released. It was a 2-board machine, and they sent me a sort of a half machine to play with. And they said, here's the code, here's our driver for it. And we adopted it into CGminer. And I made some changes and we made some fixes, and they didn't adopt it. And that was actually the last I heard from them. So then,
they're like, yeah, we got this from here. Don't worry about it.
Yeah, and I mean, that's their business. But basically, one of the things about CGminer was it was open source software, and it was originally GPL version 2 licensed, GNU public license, and then we changed it to version 3 to include some other code, which is even more restrictive than version 2. But I came from the Linux kernel world, so this was the obvious thing to do. But once they started asking me to write drivers for it, all of these companies actually said, do you want shares in the company? And so on. I said, no, all I want to do is write the code. You can pay me in Bitcoin and I'll write the code.
Wow.
I used to give them a price for what it would be to write the driver code. And I said, so here's my price per hour. I don't know how long it'll take me. I can estimate. But I also always gave them a discount option. I said, if I give you the 3/4 of the price per hour, then you have to allow me to include the code back into CGminer itself.
Yeah.
So that because I was a big believer in the open source premise, and every single one of them took me up on that. So the beauty of that was these companies would come along and I'd write drivers for their hardware, and although the hardware would disappear, I'd write the peripheral code necessary to drive their hardware, and CGminer itself would keep improving, and it would keep developing more things that ASIC mining hardware would require. So companies would come and disappear about 18 months after they go live, and some of them never even came to fruition. But I kept getting paid, which is fine. I always insisted on getting paid in Bitcoin, and CGminer kept getting better. And then eventually they just stopped talking to me. And Bitmain because obviously they all want to do things in-house. And Bitmain obviously they're the biggest mining hardware manufacturer, but they're also the worst offender, because come the S9, what they did was they renamed CGminer BM Miner. But the fingerprint was there. CGminer is definitely the code that they were using. And ever since then, that's basically what they've been using. Now, the thing about the public license is you are obliged to provide software, the source code, as long as someone who owns, if you are distributing binaries of it, as long as someone who owns that hardware actually demands that they actually get a copy of the software, and no one's ever gotten a copy of their modifications. Now, the reality is that we don't really give a shit, because the CGminer code's still there, and it's just their driver to drive their hardware. The only thing that is bad about that is we can't write drivers for Bitmain hardware anymore, because we don't know how they talk. And also, they flash everything in firmware, so there'd be an awful lot of reverse engineering if you try to do it. So that's pretty much how it sort of took over the world and had a life of its own. When they stopped talking to me is when I kind of gave up even maintaining CGminer, because the need for a standalone general purpose piece of software just disappeared, because all the manufacturers just took it and they were doing their thing. They're still doing their thing with it. I'm not really sure how much of it is actually in use still today by newer hardware, but
right. I mean, that'll be interesting to try to compare and contrast. But like I know there's other firmware developers and people coming on with new control boards of their own. Like Luxor, I think, and Brains might have redone theirs in Rust. So I don't know how much they might have kept or changed, but the world has definitely changed as far as the firmware available, right? Like back when you were getting into it, you had to do it because it was an absolute necessity. But now there's I guess in a sense it's kind of decentralized or distributed, and there's less. There's more people innovating, and I think all of that was because of your predecessor and because of you. You guys definitely helped bring that along, and so now it's kind of forked a few times, and even like Epic Blockchain, right? They're writing their own firmware from scratch and whatnot. But so it's truly an inspiration, and I'm really glad that we can have this conversation with you today. What do you think, Trevor?
Well, I'm a new Bitcoiner, so I come from like the 2022 class of Bitcoin. So a lot of this stuff is very new to me, and to get to hear this story of like how this happened, like the correlation that I see, like the big thing is like Bitcoin doesn't care about us. Like, we're the end users. Bitcoin or Bitmain has never cared about us. And so, like, to see people like yourself putting all this work in to just have it kind of, like, for lack of a better term, stolen and like iterated upon from there, it's like, it's kind of disappointing. So, I my hope for the future is just that, we have more of these open source code developers building firmware that we can then iterate upon, because you have so many people in the space, especially from the pleb side of things, working and building and developing. Like, we need to be able to mess around with it and tinker in it. So that's just one of my kind of thoughts initially when hearing that conversation. But I do have a couple of questions I wanted to ask you, CK, regarding the solo pool that you kind of built. And there's a lot of Bitcoiners who are running BitAxes, and there's this whole like movement towards decentralizing Bitcoin infrastructure through that initiative. Like, what are your kind of initial thoughts on that, and like, where did that come from?
So CKPool has an unusual history, because once I'd written the client software, so CGminer is the mining software, the obvious complement was to create the server to go with the client software, which was the pool software, because at the time there was very little pool software out there, and there were only a handful of pools. In fact, there still are only a handful of pools today. That actually hasn't changed since I got in. But it was a truckload of work. It would have been a truckload of work to do, and I refused to do it on the many times that I was asked. But because I could see no actual demand for it, whereas CGminer sort of had a life of its own, because I was a miner. I wanted to write the software to use myself, and then all of the people that were using the mining software, they donate to me. It was the donation model. I didn't charge for CGminer. But I knew that I was going to use it, and people would donate to it, and there were tens of thousands of people mining, and that sort of helped keep my interest in CGminer developing. But to develop the pool software when no one's actually running a pool, I couldn't see the purpose in spending thousands of hours writing pool software if no one's going to use it. But then an entity did some venture capital funding, and they said, yeah, we'll pay for this. We'll pay for you to actually write the pool software, and we'll start a pool. And I said, well, you haven't got a business model. You're going to fail. I told them that straight up. And they said, oh, no, don't worry. We've sorted it out. We'll figure out how this is going to work. And I said, look, this is fine, but I'm absolutely certain you're going to fail. And they said, no, we're absolutely certain we're not. But that's all right. No one wanted to listen to my advice. And they said, but we're happy to pay you to write the code. I said, that's fine, as long as it's free and open again, just like CGminer. So CKPool was born because I wrote the software to create a pool that doesn't exist anymore. In fact, it only lasted a few months and disappeared because of what I said. It was very hard to start a new pool back then, and they actually didn't have hash rate to begin with. You can't start a pool with hash rate. Sorry, I can see you talking.
And when was that again? What year?
2014, 13, 14, I think it was. Yeah, so the pool was called hashmine.io. It doesn't exist anymore, but they paid for CKPool's development, which was thousands of hours and actually more work than CGminer, because I wrote it all from scratch. And as code, it's actually infinitely cleaner than CGminer, because CGminer is a spaghetti code because it was developed so abruptly as new hardware would come out and demands would change. I just kept adding and hacking, and it's a bit of a mess, but then I sort of kept cleaning it up as it went along so it would work. But CKPool was written from the ground up and it was clean. And then they disappeared, and before Hashmine, the pool itself disappeared, the community kept asking for a solo pool. So it wasn't actually my idea. They said, we'd love to be able to mine our own blocks. And what had happened was that Bitcoin back there, the Bitcoin client, as it was called back then, was just called Bitcoin before it was renamed to Bitcoin Core. All of the mining components had been removed. There was no way to mine directly to Bitcoin Core, and that's still the case today. All it provided was block templates if you wanted to use it somehow to create mining. So to solo mine, there was no way to do it unless you actually had a pool that would do it. And so I modified the CKPool code to be, instead of being a shared code, it actually was, well, whoever's mining, they get the full reward. So CKPool Solo was born. It started in 2014 as a result of that. And it was actually pretty popular for a while, and then it sort of died down, and it's sort of come back into popularity, which I think is actually a good thing. I'm not saying necessarily that people should mine at CKPool Solo, but the idea that people are mining solo, I think, is actually gels a lot more with the home miner today, because we're not at a point now where a home miner can make any meaningful profits from mining over the course of a year unless you've got industrial power and set up,
or if you're leasing an apartment and you're not paying for your power or something, right?
Well, people have done that since day one, and basically they end up finding that they're breaking their lease agreements and they get sued for it. So no, I don't think that's actually realistic. But basically, most of the mining hardware now is such a ridiculously small proportion of the network hash rate that the only way that makes sense is actually to solo mine. So instead of actually going bigger and bigger at home, I think it actually makes sense to get a lot more people into it with smaller mines and just solo mine. But the problem is that you can't just do that to Bitcoin Core. And so CKPool Solo sort of had a resurgence, and it's actually more popular now than it's been in a number of years because of that. And I've got over 9,000 users now, which I never actually envisioned would ever happen. But the hash rate's not that much, but there's an awful lot of bit axes out there, and a few people with real mining hardware connected to it, and a few people that rent every so often as gamblers. But so it's still going. Now, I wanted to shut it down when I actually sort of lost interest, and it was solving one block every 18 months. I wanted to shut the pool down. And the community said, no, we'll fund the running of the hosting, the hardware. And I said, oh, all right, if you're going to fund it, I'll keep running it, but I don't see a point in even charging a fee for it. So I said, I'll make it zero fee. And they said, no, keep the fee in there because, just for your effort. So that's how it still remains a fee-based pool at 2%. But I was actually quite happy to have run it at 0%. I even ran ran a shared pool for a while there with zero fee, but I could not attract miners. That's how much the mining scene's changed since the pool started. The pool scene has changed, but it's hasn't at the same time. Like the stakes are different. There's big corporations involved. There's big money involved, but there's still only basically 10 pools.
Well, and something that, so again, I come from this as like a new Bitcoiner. Like these bit axes, these are like the likelihood that anybody's gonna get a block with a bit axe is so infinitesimally small. But I think it's more of the ethos that draws people in. I mean, I have one of these just sitting up on my shelf up here. And the idea that like every 10 minutes I have an infinitesimally small chance of mining a block and contributing to the decentralization of Bitcoin with that is, from an ethos standpoint, it makes me happy. And I'm like, yeah, I'll run one of them. I'll run 100 of them if I could get 100 of them in here. But maybe that's kind of where this resurgence has come from for CKPool, because obviously I can't run my BitAxe to F2 pool or Brains because it's such a small hash rate. But this idea of being able to solo mine and possibly get a block is incredible. And then you have the actual like use case of it, where just before the national conference in Nashville, somebody actually hit a block on CKPool with a bit axe.
That's right.
And
that's right. Yeah.
I think that was incredible. That was why I got my bit axe. And to be honest, like I was like, oh well, somebody did it, I guess I could do it. Like let's get a bit axe.
So Con, why don't you tell us about that? I know there's some like news about it and some tweets and whatnot. But yeah, what are the details of that? Like, do you know maybe how long that person was on the pool and how much hash rate they had in total?
Yeah, I do. It was certainly, so they were ridiculously lucky is probably the best way to describe it, because they were only on the pool for about I think it was 17 days. It was either 14 or 17 days. So they were only mining for a couple of weeks. The thing was that they were 300 gigahash, which is less than the current Bitaxes. I think it would have been one of the early generation initially. And then about a couple of days before they solved the block, they went up to 3 terahash. So I'm guessing they either added more miners, or maybe it was a Bitax and something else or whatever. But it still wasn't an awful lot of hash rate. But the actual worker that solved the block was 300. Was called had the .bitax extension, and it was a 300 gigahash worker. So it was almost certainly one of those earlier generation Bitaxes, which awesome. Is fantastic. But I mean, it's like running the lottery. The difference is that you're actually contributing to the network, and you're getting KYC free Bitcoin out of it, which is fantastic.
Yeah, and that's what a lot of people are doing it for. That KYC free sats, and then also, like Trevor's been talking a lot on other podcast episodes about, people are just mining for the heat. There's a guy named Carl Rev Hodl in Michigan, and he's doing all sorts of crazy things with miners. So like, it's not even necessarily about the economics of it from like how much Bitcoin can I mine. It's like, he's reviving his sheep and his goats and putting them in incubators warmed up by miners. And he's like drying his cannabis with the heat from the miners and things like that. Right. So it's like, yeah, it's awesome. But yeah, so I guess going back to this, idea of your pool and your number of users and whatnot, I think somebody on Twitter was asking recently, like, do you have the IP addresses of all of those users?
No.
Okay.
No, I intentionally do not log anything. I have no idea where the people are coming from. I have to put the pool. I can switch the pool into a debugging mode or a more verbose mode to actually log it. But frankly, it's none of my business.
Yeah. So I think what people were concerned about was, like, for example, if the government or somebody came along and said, well, we want to subpoena you. We want all your records. We want to figure out who this person is. Yeah, so it's going to be a lot more difficult to actually make that happen, huh?
Well, that's right. And the other thing about solo mining as opposed to regular pool mining, because of the way CKPool solo works, is I don't get the block and then distribute the reward. So I'm not a money transmitter. All I'm doing is propagating the data required for them to get a block. So strictly speaking, I'm not a money transmitter, so I don't need to actually have anything to do with KYC laws.
Right.
So, I'm sure there's a test case there, but at the moment, I don't think that would actually, I think that would be perfectly fine if it was actually tested, because I don't actually ever receive their Bitcoin and pass it on to them.
Right.
Which is something that I believed in. The whole concept of generational transactions is where when the block is solved, it appears in your wallet immediately, rather than the pool getting it and then distributing it. In the past, I mean, it's less of an issue today, but in the past, one of the problems was that the pools were run by people that didn't necessarily know what they were doing, and there were constant pool hacks back in the early days, 11s, 12s, and so on. They'd hack, and then you go, we lost, to 150 Bitcoin or whatever, because the block was 50 Bitcoin at the time. And it was just crazy to think that they were so poorly secured that they'd hack into the pool and steal it. Well, if you hack into a solo pool, nothing happens because there's no wallet there. The pool doesn't even have a Bitcoin wallet. It's just all it does is actually distribute templates.
Yeah. Well, that's interesting, because like you're saying, there's all sorts of different types of mining out there, solo mining, and then all the different fee structures, and then there's, Bitmain with their ant pool, and then all of the ant pool proxies that are masquerading out there, white label, making it look more decentralized than it is. But then, and then you have something like Ocean Pool. I'm sure you've kind of seen what's going on there with Ocean.
Yeah, for sure.
And then Stratum V2. I don't know what your thoughts on Stratum V2 was originally, and then versus now what Ocean Pool is doing. So yeah, maybe let's just talk about that a little bit. Because you had mentioned, so Bitcoin, which was now called Bitcoin Core, before that used to be able to mine, right?
Yes.
But now
Yeah.
it doesn't. So that's a major change in the
That was
Bitcoin.
that was a very long time ago, though. We're
Yeah,
talking 2012, 13, probably when this changed. But when I
yeah,
say you couldn't mine to it, they got rid of the CPU miner, and that's fine because it made no sense at all to be CPU mining to begin with. But also they changed the way you spoke to it. So it would, like I said, it would only send out block templates. So there really was no way to talk to it. I think it was a two-edged sword that the Bitcoin developers decided to do that. I mean, it's good because it meant that they didn't have to try and maintain anything to do with mining, but by the same token, it meant that mining sort of fell by the wayside and was left entirely to. There was a kind of a separation of the mining developers and the Bitcoin Core developers.
right.
And there were things that there are still things today that mining could benefit from if they were done in Bitcoin Core. And I'm not talking about protocol changes or anything like that. There's nothing to do with Bitcoin protocol. It's just a matter of the core client. If it was actually if there were things in there that could make mining more efficient, it would be helpful, because then it encourages certain workarounds that are done at the mining pool level, which I think are disadvantageous. But I guess it meant that the developers themselves could then concentrate on their core communication and protocol and wallet design and so forth, which were other issues. What Ocean's doing, I think, is good. I like what they're doing. To be honest, I haven't really looked into their Datum protocol to have an informed opinion on that. So I can't really comment on that. I do like the idea of Lightning payouts for very small payouts, because it really makes no sense to be using mainnet transactions for very small payouts, because then you have to accumulate enough. Otherwise you got lots of dust payment, clearly above dust payments.
Yeah, like my father's 80 years old. I just got him into Bitcoin mining the other week, and I think he's accumulated a total of about $8 worth of Bitcoin so far with his little 4 terahash machine. And he's like, when can I take it out of the pool and put it into my wallet? I'm like, well, that pool he's on is gonna take about 2.5 years. And then we tried to actually turn on the Lightning payouts, and it didn't work. So that specific pool says they offer Lightning payouts, but it seems to be broken, and their support doesn't really work that well.
What pool are we talking about, Scott?
They have to be Brains.
Talk about it another time.
yeah, Brains. I was able to get a Brains Lightning payout with Brains the other day. I just got a Start9 node, and so I've been like playing around with it, setting it up. And the Ocean payouts via Lightning, once you set up a channel, is actually really neat, because you mentioned it, CK, is like these small payouts. Like I have a BitAxe, I've got a little Avalon, and I have an S19 that I'm running at home. But at the end of the day, I'm only making like 1,800, 2,000, maybe even most 3,000 sats a day. And so it's going to take me a long time, even on Ocean, to get those paid out. So, having them via Lightning is a lot cooler for me, because I can see the sats come in like as I do it, like every day. So it's, as a home miner, the Lightning payout structure is so much cooler. I was going to ask, I know that you said that you didn't really like do a whole, like you haven't dove down the rabbit hole of understanding datum, but this idea of constructing your own block templates and becoming your own sovereign miner instead of just being a hasher, is this something that you would implement on CKPool? Is it even possible to do that at all?
So this is a tough question to answer, because I like it. I like the idea in principle. I like the idea of the home miner, or actually all of the miners, the clients, being the ones that get to choose the transactions, and the pool has a lot less control over what goes into the block. Stratum v2 was proposed as a way of doing this, and it's certainly lauded. And I'm going to make myself unpopular here because I think that the overheads are not actually necessarily zero of doing that. And there are latency issues to do with actually propagating your own block data, and these come at a cost. And I know they'll say that they're free, but they're not. There are a lot of low latency things to do with communicating with a pool, and certainly sending your list of transactions, no matter how compressed or efficient it is going to add to that. So I like it in principle, but by the same token, you're talking about something which may well increase the risk of an orphan block, which means that if you solve a block, someone else solves a block somewhere else in the world, and you spend a few seconds transmitting the transaction data, then your block will be trumped by the other block somewhere else in the world. I mean, it's a very small risk, but it does happen. And this is also, and by the same token, this is another problem with home mining, where if you're trying to solo mine at home, now this isn't a promotion for CK Solo Pool, by the way, but if you're trying to set up your own pool to solo mine at home, you don't have the connectivity, speed, and hardware that the pool, that something like CK Solo or any of the other major pools is actually running. You could set up similar hardware, but you're not going to make it run as efficiently as a pool. So let's say you do solve a block, right? Great. If your Bitcoin core node then takes 6 seconds to verify the block and then transmit it because you're running your pool on a Raspberry Pi, it's not a particularly powerful thing, but people like the idea of, I can put on Bitcoin core node on a Raspberry Pi. Well, these are the realistic limitations of doing it. It could be 6 seconds before you propagate your block, where someone else could have solved the block in that time frame and your block's then screwed. So if you're going to go to the effort of solo mining, you really, really want to make sure that you actually propagate the block if you ever solve one. So there is still a place for high-speed connectivity pools and so forth to do it. I am happy to help people set up a high-performant solo mine, but doing it with a Raspberry Pi over a Starlink is not the way to do it. That's all I'm going to say.
Yeah.
Right.
I know the idea is good, but realistically, if you're going to be trying to solve actual blocks locally, you need really good connectivity and a proper server hardware. So decent CPU.
There are some potential pitfalls with that then. Yeah. So like what are some possible ways to improve? And I know like Trevor said, you haven't taken a complete deep dive, but just the concept of, doing your own templates. What are some ideas that might be able to be implemented that could improve that maybe sometime in the future, or by somebody else that comes along and does more development?
I think, I have ideas about how you could do it by sharing your transactions as much as possible with the pool. So the pool already knows which ones you're likely to be using in advance, and I'm sure they do this to some degree. But the thing is, if you've got a transaction on your computer, let's say you wanted to send something to Iran. I'm not saying I would, but no one wants to, and no one wanted to mine your block because the world's now an OFAC compliant world. Then the transaction has to sit at home, and there's no way to actually propagate that if there's some kind of filtering in place or whatever. I think that there are strict limits on just how efficient you can do it, and obviously there are obviously workarounds but the pool already needs to know most of those transactions, and so do you know what I mean? It's like you've got to. Like the pool needs to know which transactions are likely to be propagated, and then it also needs to know which transactions you want to propagate. So somewhere in between there's a certain amount of communication that's still going to have to happen. If it's only one transaction, it's not a big deal. But if it's a whole lot, if you want to construct your own block entirely and you want to keep all your transactions secret, then you're going to have to wait till that moment, unless you actually send it in advance. Now, as I said, it's unfair of me to pass judgment here because I don't know how the Stratum protocol works, and it may already be doing all of what I've said as efficiently as it possibly can, but there's still going to be some extra overhead which you're never going to be able to get around.
Yeah, that makes sense. So going back again to Stratum v2, versus Datum. I mean, like, were you pretty sold on v2, or like, have you actually tried implementing that or testing it out yourself?
I've looked at the v2 protocol quite a few times. I've never tried to implement any part of it because so two things. One is well, actually three things. So the first is that Stratum v2 is a binary protocol. Stratum v1 uses JSON encoding, which is the text encoding. Binary protocols they basically use half the amount of data that clear text uses. The thing is that Stratum itself has very small sized packets that it speaks to the pool. And the way the internet works is you have a transmission unit, and once it's under a certain size, it doesn't matter how big it is as long as it stays under that size. So even if you halve that size, you're still going to send one transmission unit. So switching from a text to a binary protocol may well halve the amount of data you're sending, but it doesn't actually speed up the time it takes to send it to the other end. So the binary protocol aspect is not really an advantage at all. But the other thing about binary protocols is, as a developer, is they're a pain in the ass to debug. It's so hard to figure out where you are. You could completely get lost in the stream and then try and resume and try and figure out what the hell's going on. Obviously, there are ways around all this, but one of the nice things about the binary protocol, sorry, as a developer here, is that you don't need to do the JSON encoding and then decoding. The pool uses an awful lot of CPU doing that, because I did a lot of profiling to see where all the CPU usage is. So that's a minor advantage, but the pool at the moment is not stressed at all. I've got 9,000 users, but the CKPool, as it currently stands, and I'm using just the lowest level sort of bare bones server hardware that I can use. I could easily scale that to 100 exahash at the moment. So it's not a CPU problem. Okay, so that's the first thing about the binary protocol I don't like. The reason they moved to a binary protocol is to speed up that block transaction template transmission. Okay. Because if you're going to send a whole lot of transactions and you make them half the size, then that's efficient. So that's one of the main reasons they moved to it. Now, I've already told you I have my reservations about doing that, because I think it adds overheads, that latency overheads, and there are ways around it. You could be solving empty blocks in the interim until you send the transactions. But if you've solved the block which has transactions that you haven't propagated yet, the pool has to wait for them to come from the miner. So I still have issues with that. So they're the two major things. The third thing is most miners, I'm sorry to say this, and I'd like them to care, but most miners don't care, because we're no longer in a world where the majority of the hash rate is run by home miners. A good 99.9% of the hash rate is run by big corporate entities that couldn't care less about this. They just want to plug in as much hardware as they can. And they'll put someone in charge of doing that. And the last thing they care about is then, now we have to set up our own freaking template generation to do exactly what the pool's already doing. Now, I'd like to make them care, but I can't. We're in a world where we actually can't make them care. I envisioned a workaround for that, where you could create like a template, a standalone template generation box and proxy all at one, which you could sell to big mining entities. So that would be my solution, where you the miners could plug in all of their hardware going into a single proxy that would be configurable, which also does their own template generation, and it's all in one. And if you had it to just set default block templates, then most mining entities would just do this anyway and not have to worry about it. So that is a workable solution, I see. But again, that would involve implementing Stratum v2. Now, the thing is that very few pools are doing it. Even less miners care about it, to be honest, because of what I said. They just want to mine, and they're big VC-funded entities. So there are challenges there, and I'm not entirely sure we're ever going to overcome them, and that I don't think we're going to see the end of Stratum anytime soon. We may still be IPv4 versus IPv6 type situation where everyone's, that's what I envision.
So, yeah, I mean, it's just amazing to think back, I mean, this has only been like 10 years or so, and the technology is still so young. This is like the infancy stage. And, and I know this question has probably been asked a lot before, but I just like to get it on record here, for our audience to understand. But do you think Satoshi ever imagined pool mining?
I haven't read all of Satoshi's writings, so I can't proclaim to know exactly what he was thinking. But what I did read from what he'd said about mining was very, very limited, in fact. But the one thing he did say was he didn't envision that everyone would be running a node in the future, and he did talk about servers doing the bulk of the work. They weren't even called pools at the time, so I think he had already anticipated that it would happen, that there would be a degree of centralization of power, and provided that it's split into enough entities, it wouldn't be an issue. But I can't remember the exact quote, but he did talk about servers as, doing the bulk of the work. And he didn't specify specifically mining. I think he had the idea that maybe there'd be a much smaller number of Bitcoin nodes, full Bitcoin nodes, and a whole lot of lighter nodes. And that's effectively what the Bitcoin network is now. Not that many people run actual Bitcoin core nodes, whereas the number of people connected to the Bitcoin network via Electrum and other light wallets and so forth is absolutely massive. So that's descriptive of that, but he wasn't clear about whether he's talking about the mining being clustered or not. So I don't think he had made a call. Maybe he envisioned it, maybe not. I don't know. I do think he had said early on to try and discourage people from GPU mining. Or it wasn't GPU, it might have been to develop ASIC mining. I can't remember what it was. I think it might have been to discourage people to develop ASIC mining. It was he was hoping for a gentleman's type agreement that people wouldn't actually go in that direction. But money will flow where money will flow, and he couldn't stop that.
Yeah,
so,
and with such a big network, obviously it's 16 years in, the network is growing, but the idea is to expand the network globally. Over the next however many years that takes. It could be 50, could be 100 years, whatever. Like, there's going to be so many different types of people that come in, and they're not going to have the same ethos. I think that's kind of part of why we're seeing, as you alluded to earlier, is, there are people that don't care about the block structure, the template creation. They don't care what pool they're running. All they care about is the fact that there's this monetary incentive of mining Bitcoin. And the more people that come on, there's going to be a lot of that coming in, and less of the, I guess, ethos of the cypherpunks, So I'm curious, like, how we kind of maintain that ethos in a world where, you have more of these people who just don't care.
That's a hard question.
Yeah.
I think one of the advantages we have is that the developers care, and the Bitcoin core development is never going to be captured in that way. And so it's going to make it impossible for them to ever sort of shift it in a direction we don't want. And the fact that the people who do run the nodes, we proved during the block size wars that they care. We can't make miners care, and to be honest, they haven't ever cared as much as they. And I think once we hit the ASIC era, it kind of sort of it started accelerating that movement to not caring. But that's not necessarily a bad thing. It's if you've got enough people and they've got a financial incentive for Bitcoin to survive, they only need to care a tiny bit that it survives. And miners are never going to try and kill off the Bitcoin, but they're not going to care enough to worry about the nuts and bolts at the bottom. But we are, and the people running the nodes are, and the people writing what goes into the nodes are. And so we're going to keep them honest indirectly. The only real concern is, and obviously you're alluding to this, is how do we stop mining pool centralization to the point where it all ends up being the one pool, which it sort of looks like at the moment. I'm not a fatalist. I don't think we're going to fall over, because I think if there is a true risk to Bitcoin, if there's a and it has happened in the past. So this happened in 2013, I think it was, where one pool does have the majority of the hash rate. I think most of these mining entities, they do have, in fact, all of them, the venture capital funded entities, they still have people that set up their mining hardware that understand Bitcoin, at least on a fundamental level, enough to know that if there was an existential crisis to Bitcoin, they could all switch pools. I do still have faith that this is going to happen if it really does reach a point where everyone's mining at Antpool or what's the North American one called?
Foundry.
Foundry, yeah. If everyone's mining them and then they start misbehaving, I'm pretty sure there is enough communication across the internet today that we would know very quickly, and we could all switch overnight. And the other thing is that we do have another tool as a backup, and I've made CKPool available so that if you're stuffed and the entire world has now made it so that you can't mine at any pool, anyone can spin up a solo pool of their own now. So there is still a backup. I think in the past we had we got to one pool was 40-something%. I think Ghash was the
which one?
GHASA. It doesn't exist anymore. It was in 2000. And there was overwhelming concern from the community, even though everyone wanted to mine there, because the bigger the pool, the less less variance there was in payout. So it sort of hash rate attracts hash rate, which is an inherent flaw and problem with pool mining that there still is no solution for. But the community was in uproar about it. So Ghash themselves said, we're not taking any more miners on board. We're refusing to take any more registration. So they bowed to the pressure. And then within the space of a year, everyone left Ghash, and then the place folded. So it doesn't even exist anymore. But obviously they made an absolute shitload in the lead up to that.
Not much loyalty, really. It seems like people follow the hash rate, or they follow the cheapest fees, or whatever, the lowest latency, and or the most decentralized, or whatever, right? But well, interesting. So I have a question from the Peanut Gallery. Somebody was asking, the CK in CKPool, is that your name, or does the K stand for Kano?
Oh, no, it's my name. It's my name. It's Con Colibus. Kano's he was my sidekick for many years. That we worked together, and then we started having disagreements, and then I kind of kicked him off the CKPool project and the CGminer project at the same time. But at the time when CKPool came out, it was my name, which is Con Colibus, but I said, but you can also probably think of it as Con and Kano's pool. So that's where
dual purpose, maybe.
Yeah. So I certainly named it after myself. Maybe a bit of ego there, but at the same time I said, but you can also think of it as Con and Kano's pool, because he was developing a database for CKPool, and then we had disagreements, and that ended.
Can I ask what what did the disagreements center around?
So yeah, this is hard, but all right. So in the lead up to the block size wars, firstly, this is when we started not necessarily seeing eye to eye, because I thought Lightning would be fantastic for Bitcoin and SegWit, and he didn't necessarily. I'm not saying he was a big blocker, because he certainly maintained his affiliation with regular Bitcoin.
Sure.
And we certainly didn't necessarily agree on that. But the main thing that we started disagreeing with on was he had started his own pool, which is fine, running CKPool and his own database that ran with CKPool. And I was a big believer in opening up my software as much as possible. And like I said, it's always been a believer in it. But the database that he was developing for CKPool was becoming more and more dedicated to just working around the pool that he was running specifically. And then he stopped actually contributing the code back to the free software community. So because he didn't like the idea of his code being used by other people. And to this day, he probably is not aware, but that's the main thing that I actually disagreed with, because that is something that I was never into. I wasn't interested in running a business and trying to run my pool and make as much profit only. It was certainly a nice thing. It was certainly a nice thing to do, but he stopped contributing his code back to the community and started just doing it all in private, which that's his prerogative. But by the same token, it wasn't what I wanted. And I told him to stop actually paying me from his pool, because he used to give me a small proportion of the reward for himself. And eventually, when he did, then I actually cut him off from the contributing to the CKPool code, and I ripped the database out of the GitHub, so that CKPool just became a standalone project of just the pool itself, without a database to go with it. And he didn't take lightly to it, but I did try to tell him that I didn't want to be involved with his pool anymore, but basically that's how we had a disagreement, and unfortunately, it didn't. He took it quite bitterly, which is a shame. But then again, I can understand why, because I just sort of cut him off. But
yeah.
Anyway,
understandable. Yeah, I mean, people have their own opinions. They have their own projects. People go their own ways sometimes, and just kind of life, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, we're getting to the top of the hour here. We've just passed over an hour. There's a question that I ask every guest that comes on the show. And Scott, I want to hear this from you too, but I'll let CK go first. So I like to ask everyone, it's really philosophical, but what does Bitcoin mean to you, CK?
Freedom money. Yeah. It always has been, always will be. I think the whole idea of separation of money and state is fantastic. Once you understand just how fucked up fiat is, you can really see that Bitcoin is our best chance at actually fixing it. And how I introduce it to people who don't understand Bitcoin is because they know I'm into Bitcoin. And I never try to orange pill people. People come to me and ask for their orange pill generally. I explain to them what's wrong with fiat, and then they say, so what, Bitcoin fixes this? Bitcoin's the solution. I said, look, what Bitcoin is it may not be the solution, but what it is a reference for how money should be. I said it may or may not become the solution to the problem, but it is a reference for how money should actually operate, and is our best chance at actually doing it. And it may or may not be the solution, but we have all learned so much from it. And so, yeah, it all comes back down to, what is money? And I think Bitcoin is our best chance at describing what money is. Was it like that when I first got into Bitcoin? No, because for me, I got into Bitcoin because of the mining, not because of Bitcoin itself. Yeah. I got introduced to it by someone who was mining Bitcoin. And I can tell you my introduction to it, my own self-orange pilling, because we were Linux developers and hackers and stuff, and he had a high-spec GPU, and none of us were gamers at the time. And I said, "Why have you got a high-spec GPU?" And he said, "Because I'm Bitcoin mining." And I said, "Oh, that sounds illegal." That was my response. And then he briefly described Bitcoin. I went and read the white paper, and I said, "Oh, this is cool." And I really liked the technology because I was into distributed computing projects at the time. But then once you got into the distributed computing aspect, I thought, so mining was the obvious way. I thought this is a fantastic use of distributed computing. What if we actually use it to make a new reference money? This is amazing. And so that aspect was how I got into it. And I liked the idea of a deflationary currency. I didn't understand it fully at the time. I just knew that it was inherently right compared to what we currently had. And then it taught me an awful lot about economics and money as a result of it. But I certainly don't regret going down that path.
Yeah,
so
that's a beautiful answer. No, I love that. This is my favorite question to ask because you get so many different answers, and because you've been around. I mean, you've been in the space for a long time now. To hear that from you and the way that you kind of break down that perspective is very it's fun for me. So thank you for that. All right, Scott, you're up.
Yeah. So I mean, for me, well, kind of a similar path to CK. I got into Bitcoin through Bitcoin mining. I was doing internet marketing, digital marketing, helping people get exposure and fixing their websites and stuff. And I had actually fallen into Bitcoin mining because of Halong Mining. They were making the Dragon Mint T1 back in 2017. And I was like, I don't know how I came across this website because I don't think I was really interested in Bitcoin at all, but I saw a really bland website and I said, I can help that company. So I reached out to them on Twitter. I'm like, hey, let me help you with your website. And they said, actually, what we really need is a CRM. We're getting all these leads. We don't want to lose them. So we need some software to start tracking everybody and making sure these sales don't get lost. So I did that. And one thing led to another. I started doing customer service. I started doing marketing, started doing sales because the owner, he was BTC Drac. CK, do you know BTC Drac?
I do,
yeah. And he was a pseudonym, so nobody really knew who he was. He couldn't go to these conferences. He couldn't go to meetings and shake people's hands and sign things in person. So I would do that. So I was going from internet marketing to all of a sudden signing multi-million-dollar deals for Bitcoin mining machines. And so it was just crazy. It was like, once I learned about this stuff, there was no turning back for me. So I started getting orange pilled just because of Bitcoin mining and working in the industry. And then from there, I was like, well, geez, Bitmain in 2018 started selling their miners for like $300 a pop. It was the S9s at the time. And nobody else could sell miners. What's Miner, Silicon, Halong Mining, nobody could sell miners because they couldn't compete. Bitmain was trying to offload so many miners that they had on inventory that they were probably basically selling them for their cost. And it caused the company I was working for to go down. And, they had to lay me off. And then eventually I was like, you know what? I know a lot of people who need to buy miners, and I know a lot of people who want to sell their old miners. So I kind of reinvented myself as a Bitcoin mining equipment broker before even I knew what that was. And then I found out that there's actually a few of us out there. So there's like maybe 6 or 7 of us in the United States doing this. And we found each other on Telegram, created groups, created communities, and just started keeping in touch. One thing led to another, and I was all in. And I was like, that's it. I'm never making a website ever again. But it's just interesting, like Trevor, now we've built up this company called Bitcoin Mining World. And now part of our services is actually doing marketing and media services for other Bitcoin companies. So it's just interesting. So yeah, I mean, I don't know. That was the long answer. The short answer, like what Bitcoin means to me. Well, it might lead to another long answer, but What Bitcoin means to me, it is, yeah. When I first got into Bitcoin, okay, another story. I got pissed off because my whole entire life I had not really understood the whole thing about gold and how the government, took the gold and revalued it, and eventually after that they took everybody off the gold standard. I felt like I had, the fleece pulled over my eyes my entire life. And once I actually learned about Bitcoin, I realized how messed up it is, just like you were saying, Con. So yeah, like I just see Bitcoin as an alternative, like a way to opt out, right? And like CK said, it's purposely deflationary, which is amazing. It's just so different than the way that the governments in the world is doing it, and it just makes sense. So I think that's why what Bitcoin means to me, and why I love Bitcoin.
That's a beautiful answer. And, to get a little bit of your background for the audience is good. We need that. Thank you both for answering that question. I think at the end of the day, for me, I take this right out of Saylor's book, is it's hope. Bitcoin is hope for the future, because now we have a technology where we can save our time, which we trade for money, and we can put it towards the future, and we can, have that future actually mean something versus having it be stolen from us. So that's my take on it. But, CK, do you do a lot of like communicating with the plebs and with people on Twitter at all?
I guess I do a lot more now. Yeah, I used to be very big on Bitcoin Talk, where all of the pleb miners were, but and I was a moderator on there for many years as well. But it became overwhelming, and I needed to take a break from it. And then I sort of came back in the Twitter space initially, and then as X now. I started doing the usual thing that a lot of Bitcoiners do, and then a lot of shit posts and memes, and I sort of wound back on that because you can spend all day doing that. So I do engage with people, but not very often. I think people just follow me more for signal about solo blocks and mining and so forth. I have so many interests that I'd love to talk about all of them on Twitter and X, but I know the vast majority of people just follow me because they want to know, did I solve a block?
No, I follow you because I want to see what phase of the moon we're currently at right now, because you take some pretty stellar pictures of the solar system. Man. That's wild.
Yeah, I can't resist posting those, but generally that's about the only thing I post outside of Bitcoin related posts. But I do engage with people, but I'm actually starting to enjoy X quite a lot now because it's changed so much. Yeah.
Well, do you mind sharing out your X account tag?
Sorry?
Do you mind sharing out your handle?
Yeah, CKPool Dev.
CKPool Dev. No.
Yeah.
Awesome.
I tried CK, but CK was taken, and I tried CKPool. I think even that was taken, but yeah.
We need to get him on Telegram. This is like, how Bitcoin Talk Forum used to be. A lot of that has obviously moved to Twitter, but a lot of it has also moved to Telegram. And we have some pretty killer communities on Telegram where we're talking nonstop 24/7 about Bitcoin mining. We've built it up over the last 7 years, and it's pretty intense. So I'd love to see you on Telegram one day.
Yeah. See, this is my 14th year in Bitcoin space, and it's very hard to maintain the rage to actually spend 24/7 talking Bitcoin mining. I'll be brutally honest, and so I tend to do it in fits and starts. And the last thing I need is a Telegram group to be sucked into 24/7 again. So
you can put up notifications.
He's like, look, I got other hobbies that don't involve Bitcoin. Okay, guys, ask me about the moon phase.
I don't believe it. The only reason I would believe it is because he posts pictures of his telescope, and that's the only. Okay, he's got other hobbies. Okay, that's fine. I get it. Nobody's perfect.
I love it.
Look, Bitcoin's a massive part of my life, and that's why I quit medicine as well. So, it doesn't get any bigger than that. But
right. That's where the doctor comes from, I guess.
Yeah, I was a specialist in anesthesia for many years, and I quit thanks to Bitcoin. it helped me escape the rat race.
Nice.
Well, congratulations. All right, guys. Well, I'm going to close out this episode. If you guys have anything else, like some last minute words you want to say, go ahead and do that now.
Yeah. Well, we'll stick around and chat afterwards. So you can definitely play the outro.
All right, guys. Hey, I
Cool.
appreciate everybody for being here. It's fun to get to do what I do. And Scott, I appreciate you, man, for making this happen. Like, really, at the end of the day, like, I'm happy that you came on today to show your face, because none of this would be possible if it weren't for your spaghetti throwing. So
I like throwing spaghetti.
you do like to throw spaghetti. All right, guys, this has been the Build a Mind podcast. We will see you guys next week for another great episode. And you guys take care.
Please note, the Build a Mind podcast provides information for general educational purposes only. This information should not be construed as legal, financial, or investment advice. We do not guarantee the accuracy or completeness of any information presented, and we encourage you to consult with a professional advisor, legal advisor, and/or financial advisor before making any financial decisions. The Build a Mind podcast and its affiliates are not responsible for any losses incurred as a result of using the information provided.